Police humiliated an old black veteran, then his son arrived, America's deadliest soldier alive. They arrested an old black man inside his own auto shop. He had a bronze star, 2 Purple Hearts, and a name that meant something in his town. But none of that mattered when he told the wrong cop the one thing that took real courage. No. The handcuffs dug into his wrists. His tools were still on the workbench. His shop was still warm from the morning's first repair. And as they dragged him away for disturbing the peace, no one knew what would happen next. He sat in the holding cell, quiet, calm, like a man who had seen worse and lived through it. They offered him one phone call. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the press. He called his son. And the moment that call was answered, everything changed. Harold Carter had worked on cars longer than most people had been alive. 43 years, 6 days a week, rain or shine. His shop sat on the edge of Millbrook, just one garage bay, a small office, and a wall of old photos. Most of those pictures were black and white. One showed Harold in uniform, barely 20, standing in the dirt and heat of Vietnam. Another showed him and his wife on the day he opened the garage. A few showed a little boy standing beside a grease-stained workbench. That boy had grown up and left town, but Harold kept those pictures close. They reminded him of who he was and what he'd fought for. It started like any other morning. The air smelled of motor oil and old rubber. A Camry sat in the bay, hood up. Harold wiped his hands on a red rag and leaned over the engine. Water pump. He didn't even need to test it. He could hear it. The bell over the office door rang. He didn't look up right away. "Be right with you," he called, voice deep, calm. But then he heard it. That voice. That tone. "Take your time, old man. We got all day." It was Officer Blake, and Harold knew what that meant. Blake wasn't the kind of cop who showed up to help. He was the kind who showed up to remind people who ran the town. A tall man with cold eyes and a badge that did more damage than good. 2 other officers stood beside him, quiet, watching. Harold turned, keeping his voice steady. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Blake smiled, slow and smug. He ran his finger across the hood of the Camry, like he was looking for dirt. "Nice place you got here, Carter. Been open long?" 43 years, Harold said. Blake gave a low whistle. "That's a long time. You must be doing something right." Harold watched the way the men moved. It wasn't random. It was practiced. Intimidation wasn't new. To Harold, he'd seen it in war. He'd seen it in men who thought fear made them powerful. "I do honest work for honest pay," Harold said. "Always have." Blake's smile didn't fade. "See, that's the thing. Times are changing. Insurance, inspections, safety. It's hard to stay in business these days. Wouldn't want anything to happen to your shop." Harold said nothing. $500 a month, Blake continued. "Call it community support. You pay, we make sure everything runs smooth. No delays, no fires. You understand?" "No," Harold said. Just that. One word. Quiet. Steady. Blake's smile vanished. "Maybe you should think about what could happen if you don't cooperate." "I already have," Harold replied. "I fought real enemies. Men who believed in something. You're not one of them." For a second, no one moved. The garage was silent, the kind of silence that made your skin tighten. Blake stepped forward, towering over Harold. "Careful, old man. That sounds like disrespect." "I know my rights," Harold said, "and I know what this is. You want a bribe, but I'm not paying." Blake didn't reply. He just turned, muttering something about teaching him a lesson. That night, Harold stayed late, locking every bolt and checking every light twice. He didn't sleep much. And when he opened the shop the next morning, his heart sank. Every window was smashed. Spray paint covered the walls. His tools, some older than the officers themselves, were broken and thrown across the floor. Oil had been dumped on customer, cars, and on his bench was a rat, dead, with a note pinned to its back. "Next time, it's you." Harold stood in the mess, calm, quiet, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Clarity. He picked up the phone. He didn't call the police. He called his son. And on the other end of the world, a man with no fear and no time for corruption answered with one word. "Dad?" Harold said, "I need your help." "Dad?" The voice came through the encrypted line. Calm, steady. But underneath, there was something else. A shift. A tension. Like steel being drawn in the dark. Harold sat on the small metal bench in the jail cell, elbows resting on his knees, phone pressed to his ear. His other hand still ached from where the cuffs had dug into his wrist. He kept his voice quiet. "I didn't want to call, but they crossed the line." There was a pause, no questions, just the sound of his son breathing. "They destroyed my shop," Harold continued. "Broke every window, poured oil on the cars, left a dead rat on my bench. Then they threw me in here for daring to file a report." Another long silence, and then, finally, his son spoke. "Who did it?" Harold looked through the bars at the empty hallway. "Local police, Officer Blake. Same guy you warned me about years ago. He's got 2 others with him. They're not hiding what they are anymore." This time, the reply came sharper, colder. "All right, sit tight. I'm coming." The line went dead. Harold leaned back against the cold concrete wall. He didn't smile. He didn't relax. But something inside him let go. Not of the problem, only of the fear. Because he knew one thing for sure. When his son said, "I'm coming," he meant it. 7,000 miles away, the man known only as the Ghost stood in a dim room lit by satellite screens and soft blue monitors. His real name? Colonel Damon Carter. Delta Force. Intelligence code. Unlisted. Status. Classified. His missions didn't get mentioned in press conferences. They were buried in black folders with no titles. Until now, he hadn't planned to leave. But some things change everything. "Colonel," said the tech behind him, "we're green across all teams, ready to breach." Colonel Carter didn't move. He stood still, eyes fixed on one satellite feed showing a warehouse in Eastern Europe. His voice was quiet, but final. "Command is yours. Execute without me." Sati, team lead, a capable woman with calm hands, didn't question him. No one did. When the Ghost changed course, you let him. By the time the jet wheels lifted off the runway, he had already called in 2 favors from old contacts in 3-letter agencies. By the time they crossed over the Atlantic, he had a file open on Officer Blake, and it was worse than expected. Money from strip clubs, silent partners in pawn shops, sealed complaints that somehow vanished. The man was deep in something dirty, and he wasn't working alone. By the time the jet landed, Colonel Carter was a shadow in plain clothes, walking through Millbrook like he'd never left. No uniform, no parade, just purpose. Harold had been released just after midnight. The officer at the front desk didn't explain why, only that someone made a call. His fingerprints were erased, his record wiped clean. But Harold knew what that meant. He'd seen that kind of fear before. Not in the jail, on the faces of the officers, especially Blake. Blake had smiled too much that morning. Now he didn't smile at all. The next morning, Harold returned to the shop. It looked worse in daylight. The smell of gasoline and oil still hung in the air, thick and sour. The broken glass sparkled like cruel diamonds on the floor. Spray paint covered the walls. Angry symbols, slurs, warnings. His tools, the ones he'd used since the 80s, were twisted and dented. He stood in the doorway and just breathed. Behind him, a voice spoke. Calm, familiar. You always did park crooked. Harold turned. There he was. Taller now, stronger, but still his boy. Wearing jeans and a plain black jacket, short hair, sharp eyes. A quiet danger followed him, like heat that hadn't yet reached the skin. Harold didn't say anything at first, just nodded. I figured you wouldn't stay gone, Harold said. I figured you'd call before it got this far, Daman answered. They stood there for a while, just looking at the damage. Was it as bad as I described? Harold asked. No, Daman said. It's worse. He walked slowly through the garage, eyes scanning details others might miss. Footprints, angles of impact, even the way the oil had been spilled told a story. He made mental notes. This wasn't random, he said. They wanted to break you, not just your shop. They failed, Harold replied simply. Daman turned to face him. Yes, but now it's my turn. Harold narrowed his eyes. You planning to make noise? No, Daman said. I'm planning to be the silence that comes before the fall. That afternoon, Officer Blake opened a folder on his desk. There was no name on the front, but inside were high-resolution photos. One was of his patrol car, taken from a rooftop. Another of his daughter getting ice cream 2 towns over. He blinked, looked around the office, then, at the bottom of the folder, a message written in clean handwriting. You should have thought twice. You touched the wrong man's father. Blake stood, went to the window, and for the first time since he'd joined the force, he started to sweat. The photo of his daughter stuck with him all day. Officer Blake had dealt with plenty of threats in his time. Angry shop owners, drunk drivers, even the occasional gang member acting brave. But this was different. This wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Whoever had placed that folder on his desk had done so without tripping a single alarm. Cameras caught nothing. No one saw a thing. And that meant one thing. Whoever they were better than him. And Blake didn't like being second best. So he started digging. He called a contact at the courthouse. Told them to pull military records, the ones not sealed. The name was Colonel Damon Carter. That much he already knew from town gossip. What he didn't know was just how far the file went, because it didn't. It ended. Black ink, redacted lines, multiple security flags. Blake stared at the screen, his throat dry. He leaned back, heart beating louder than he liked. He didn't know much about secret files, but he knew when something was above his pay grade. And this man, the one whose father he'd tried to break, wasn't just military. He was untouchable. Blake stood up fast, knocking his chair over. He grabbed his coat and walked straight out of the precinct without a word. He needed help. Bigger help. And he knew where to go. Harold leaned under the hood of the only car in the garage. His knuckles were scraped. His back ached more than usual. But he didn't stop. He never had. Even after the vandalism, even after the arrest, he'd come back. That's just who he was. Daman watched from the office doorway, arms crossed, silent, his mind running like a machine, every second another plan forming. You could take a break, Daman finally said. Harold didn't look up. Not if I want this car running by 3. You just got attacked, arrested, threatened, and you're fixing an alternator? Harold wiped his hands with a rag. Some men build with their hands, some just destroy with theirs. Daman gave a half smile. And some do both. Harold looked up at him. You're not here to fix cars, son. What are you doing? I'm hunting. Harold gave a short nod. He understood. Daman walked to the far wall and tapped a photo frame. It swung open, revealing a black case mounted behind it. He pressed his thumb to a small sensor, and the case clicked open. Inside, documents, drives, a small tablet, and a device no civilian would recognize. Dahman took the tablet, slid into the chair, and opened it. Maps, communications, names. He wasn't guessing anymore. Officer Blake wasn't the only one with power in Millbrook. There were others: a judge, a city official, a real estate developer with too much interest in Harold's neighborhood. Dahman had uncovered all of them in less than 24 hours, and he wasn't alone. "Lieutenant," he spoke into his earpiece, "run a full scan on Judge Howard's financials. I want to know who's paying him." "Yes, sir," came the reply. Harold looked over, raising an eyebrow. "You're not just after the officers." "No," Dahman replied. "I'm after the system that protects them." Blake knocked twice before entering the private backroom of a local bar, one with no name and no windows. Inside, a man sat in a leather booth, drinking something too expensive for Millbrook. Blake didn't waste time. "We've got a problem." The man didn't look up. "You always do. This one's different. Carter's son. He's not normal." Now the man looked up. "Define not normal." Blake swallowed. "He's Delta, but not the kind they show on TV. He's got Black Ops clearance. Ghost level." The man leaned back slowly. "And you touched his father?" Blake didn't answer. "You idiot," the man whispered. "You didn't just poke the bear. You woke a ghost." The room went quiet, and then the man spoke again, slower this time. "There's only one play now. We make a call." "To who?" "To the people who clean up messes before they turn into fires." Blake hesitated. "Isn't that overkill?" The man smiled coldly. "Not when you've got a Carter involved." Back at the garage, Dahman stepped outside into the fading light. He stood still, eyes scanning the street like he used to scan rooftops in hostile territory. He could feel it in the air. They were planning something. He pulled his phone out and dialed a secure number. "Command, this is Carter. You've got satellite access? Roger. Eyes on your sector. What are you looking for?" "Anything that moves like a tail but acts like a wolf." The reply was instant. "Copy that. You've got at least 2 vehicles watching your location. Dark SUVs, rotating shifts, plates don't match registration." Dahman nodded to himself. "Let them watch," he said. "Let them think they're ahead." He ended the call and walked back inside. Harold looked up from under the car. "They watching?" "Yeah," Dahman replied. "But they don't know what they're really looking at." Harold gave a half smile. "Well, I hope they're taking notes." Dahman paused by the front door, just for a moment, and under his breath, he said what he hadn't said in years. "Next move's mine." It started with a knock on a judge's door. At 2 a.m., no one knocks on your door unless they want something, or they want to end something. Judge Howard had been asleep when the knock came. He opened the door half-dressed, confused, annoyed. On the ground, in a plain envelope, was a photo. Just one. It showed him, 3 years ago, standing beside Officer Blake in a hotel parking lot. Cash in one hand, a handshake in the other. No caption, no threat. But the message was loud enough to silence. A lifetime. Judge Howard didn't sleep the rest of the night. And by sunrise, he'd made 3 calls. One to his assistant, one to his lawyer, and one to a private number that shouldn't even exist. And somewhere, watching from across the street in a parked car, Dahman Carter sat in silence. The photo of his father's bruised wrists still burned into his memory. Across town, Officer Blake was unraveling. He didn't show it in public. In uniform, he still barked orders, still walked with his chest puffed out. But at home, he barely ate, barely slept, and when his phone rang, he jumped every time. The day before, he'd met with fixers, contractors who promised they could neutralize problems. They didn't wear uniforms, and they didn't ask questions. Blake thought hiring them would fix everything. He was wrong, because they never showed up for the job. They disappeared, all 4 of them, and in the place where their vehicle had been parked, someone had left a playing card wedged into the curb, an ace of spades, with the words, "Try again." In a small conference room tucked deep inside Millbrook City Hall, the real heart of the corruption met behind locked doors. The mayor, the chief of police, the developer who'd been buying up half the block Harold's shop sat on. They were all there. The mayor paced back and forth, hands shaking. "This can't continue," he snapped. "That garage should have been cleared by now. What are you all doing?" The developer, calm, smooth, but visibly sweating, cleared his throat. "We had contractors," he said. They didn't report back. The room went quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. They weren't just dealing with a man. They were dealing with someone who trained people to disappear others. The mayor finally spoke. "We end this. We clean house. Everything. Every file. Every transaction. We go dark." They all nodded. They didn't notice the tiny black device stuck under the table. A listening bug, government-grade .fed, straight to Damon Carter's ear. From a mile away, Damon sat in Harold's shop office, listening. Calm, still. His eyes didn't blink much when he was in this mode. His old unit used to call it ghost mode. He turned to Ryan, the young officer who had risked everything by handing him real evidence. "You hear that?" Ryan nodded, pale. "They're burning the paper trail," Damon said. "So we stopped playing nice." Ryan hesitated. "If they catch me..." "They won't," Damon said. "Because tonight, they'll be too busy looking for ghosts." That evening, lights flickered in the police department. Files disappeared. Hard drives wiped. Phones rang, then were pulled from the walls. Officers who had taken bribes were suddenly trying to transfer out. Others panicked. One tried to drive out of town with a trunk full of evidence, but was stopped at the state line by federal agents. Harold watched it all happen on the small TV in his shop. "Looks like someone lit a fire," he said, sipping his coffee. Damon stood beside the front window, watching the shadows move. "No," he said quietly. "They lit it themselves. I just gave them the match." By nightfall, the mayor's house was locked down, blinds drawn, lights off, phones off. But it didn't matter, because in every room someone had already been. Not to harm, just to show. Single envelope was left on the mayor's kitchen table. Inside, a timeline of every payment, every bribe, every sealed deal tied to Harold's shop being relocated. The last page was blank, except for one sentence. "If you don't resign, you will answer publicly." The mayor didn't eat dinner that night, and when his staff arrived the next morning, they found him already gone. No resignation letter, just a desk full of shredded documents and a single playing card left in the chair. At the police station, things weren't better. Chief Hudson, silent for most of the week, called an emergency meeting at 6 a.m. "Delete everything," he told his staff. Every message, every body cam clip, every ticket log. And then the lights went out. All of them. Not just in the building, but across 4 city blocks. And when the emergency lights kicked in, someone had left a laptop in the middle of the ski. Department floor, it was open, playing a video. It showed Officer Blake smashing Harold's shop windows. Clear, close, undeniable. And then the screen shifted to footage from the back door of the courthouse, the judge accepting bribes. Then the mayor, shaking hands with a man tied to organized crime. The final clip? A close-up of Officer Blake laughing over coffee, saying, "The old man will be out of business by the weekend." Silence filled the station. Then, the sound of one man standing up. Officer Ryan. He stepped forward. Calm. Brave. "I think it's time we remember what a real officer looks like." No one argued. Not this time. Because the ghost had returned to Millbrook, and the house of cards was starting to fall. They came just after midnight. 3 black SUVs. No plates, no headlights, no noise. They parked 3 blocks away from Harold, Carter's auto shop, and walked the rest of the distance on foot. splitting into two-man teams, just like they'd been trained. These weren't small-town thugs. They weren't even regular hired guns. These were specialists, ex-military, ex-intelligence, the kind of men who operated without names, without traces, and without questions. The kind who never asked why, only when. And tonight, they were told to eliminate a man named Damon Carter. Inside the shop, the lights were off. From the outside, it looked quiet, silent, still. One dim light glowed in the back office. A shadow moved once behind the curtain, then disappeared. That was all. Team leader motioned to his crew. Silent hand signs. In 5 seconds, they breached the side door, just like the blueprints they'd studied. No alarm, no traps. But that's when they knew something was wrong. The inside of the shop was too warm, too quiet, too ready. One by one, their radios went dead. Their comms scrambled. Even their night vision goggles began to glitch. The place wasn't just booby-trapped. It was waiting. In the office, Damon Carter sat still. Completely still. He didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even exhale. He listened, and then finally, the floor creaked, not loudly, just once, right near the back wall. That was all he needed. He moved like a shadow, silent, smooth, and fast. By the time the first attacker opened the door, he was already behind him. One strike to the neck. Non-lethal, clean, precise. The man hit the ground like a sack of bricks. Damon caught the weapon before it fell. In another room, a second mercenary saw movement and opened fire. The flash lit up the room, but he was shooting at air. Behind him, Damon whispered, "You shoot too fast." Another one down. From across the street, Officer Ryan sat inside an unmarked police car holding his breath. He could hear nothing, but he didn't need to. He knew what was happening, and he knew exactly who was in control. By 12:19 a.m., the Yaks' entire squad of hired killers was laid out on the garage floor. None of them dead. None of them bleeding, but every one of them unconscious, disarmed, zip-tied, a row of ghosts caught by the real ghost. Damon stood over them in silence, breathing steady. He pulled out his phone and made one call. "Foster," he said. "Package. Secured. 6 total. No casualties." A voice replied instantly. "Copy that. Cleanup team on the way." Damon walked out into the open air, finally relaxing his grip. He didn't smile. Not yet. He just looked at the sky, then down the road at the SUV parked with its lights off. Inside it, Officer Ryan blinked twice and gave a small thumbs up. The next morning, news spread faster than coffee. Unknown group of masked men found. Unconscious in auto shop. No damage, no explanation, no answers. The police chief tried to spin it, blaming it on some break-in gone wrong. But the people in Millbrook weren't stupid. They remembered what had happened just days ago. Harold Carter was arrested. His shop was destroyed. His son had returned. And now? The shop was cleaner than ever. The windows had already been replaced. Tools reorganized. The graffiti painted over. But on the garage door, written in white chalk, someone had scrawled, "Some people wear badges, others wear honor." Across town, Officer Blake stared at the security feed in disbelief. His hired crew had failed. Worse, vanished. The last GPS ping from their phones had stopped at Carter's auto shop. After that, nothing. No arrests, no bodies, no media leaks, just silence. It was as if they'd been erased. Blake stormed into the chief's office. "They're toying with us," he snapped. "They knew we'd send a team." The chief looked up slowly, his face pale and tight. "Blake," he said quietly, "you don't understand. This man, this Carter, he's not a threat. He's a message." Blake laughed. "What's that supposed to mean?" The chief turned the monitor toward him. A new video had appeared in the inbox of every news outlet in the state. Footage of the failed raid. Silent men, taken out one by one, not with bullets, with brilliance. Damon Carter's face never appeared, but the message on the video said everything. Don't send wolves into my father's home. They will not return. Blake felt his knees wobble. For the first time since he'd pinned on a badge, he felt small. At the garage, Harold poured himself a cup of coffee. Same brand he'd used since the 80s. Same chipped mug. Damon stood, beside the window, arms crossed. You could have let me handle it quietly, Harold said. I did, Damon replied. Harold raised an eyebrow. You think letting 6 armed men nap on my floor counts as quiet? They're alive, aren't they? Harold took a long sip. Barely. They both chuckled, just a little. Then Harold looked at his son, serious again. They're going. To come harder next time. Damon nodded. I hope they do. Harold sighed. Boy, you always were stubborn. Damon glanced at the sky, and they always underestimated that. The FBI didn't knock, they just showed up, black SUVs rolling, down Millbrook's Main Street in the early morning fog. No sirens, no warning, just quiet power, like a storm that had already begun before anyone saw the clouds. Agents stepped out fast, quiet, coordinated. One headed for City Hall, another for the police department. The last one walked straight toward Harold Carter's auto shop. Inside, Harold looked up from under a truck, his wrench in one hand, the same coffee mug in the other. Looks like they're here, he said. Damon didn't reply. He was already at the door before the bell even rang. The lead agent nodded respectfully. Colonel Carter? Damon nodded once. Washington got your files, the agent said. And the video. The cleanup you did last night didn't go unnoticed. I didn't do it for the attention, Damon said. You didn't need to. The proof did the talking. Behind the agent, 2 more officers appeared with cases in hand. We're launching a full investigation. Mayor, chief, half the council, and your friendly neighborhood patrol unit, Blake. We've got sealed warrants, and we're starting now. Harold stood behind his son, arms folded. About time, he said simply. The agent nodded again, then turned back toward the black cars. The real cleanup had begun. Blake's face turned white when the feds walked in. He was halfway through his morning coffee when he saw them enter the precinct. 5 agents, no hesitation. One handed the chief a folded sheet of paper. Blake stood, trying to look casual. Can I help y'all with something? He asked, swallowing hard. The lead agent didn't look at him. He just said, Officer Blake, you're coming with us. For E? What? The agent finally looked up. For everything. Inside City Hall, files were pulled from drawers that hadn't been opened in years. Secret accounts. Memos marked, Do Not File. Hard drives hidden under floorboards. In one office, they found a burner phone taped to the underside of a chair, still buzzing from the last message sent. Carter's kid is in town. Need backup now. Too late. In the days that followed, Millbrook changed. The papers called it a reckoning. The people called it about damn time. One by one, those who thought they were untouchable were brought out in handcuffs. Former allies turning on each other in a rush to save themselves. But Harold? Harold just kept working. He changed oil, replaced a timing belt, helped a teenage boy fix his first flat tire. Because for Harold Carter, the real work didn't happen in courtrooms. It happened in the quiet, the steady, the daily. You really gonna testify? One customer asked. Harold shrugged. They asked. I'll speak. I've got nothing to hide. You nervous? Harold sipped his coffee. I've been shot at in jungles. This is just words. The courtroom was packed. Local news, national outlets, old friends, enemies pretending to be friends. Damon sat in the back. sunglasses on, silent, watching. Ryan sat on the other side, now in a suit, not a uniform. He'd been offered a promotion, but had turned it down until the department was fully cleaned. "I'm not standing on a rotten floor," he told them. The judge entered. A real one this time. Not paid. Not crooked. Harold was the first witness. He walked slowly to the stand, every step steady. They asked about the shop, the threats, the vandalism, the arrest. Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't rant. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. "When you've lived long enough," he said quietly, "you can feel when something's wrong. You can feel it in your bones. These men didn't want justice. They wanted fear. And I wasn't going to give it to them." The courtroom was silent. The jury wrote everything down. Then came Ryan. He gave them the emails, the body cam footage, the shredded files he'd copied onto a drive and hidden in his car. When asked why he did it, his voice cracked slightly. "Because I became a cop to protect people like Mr. Carter, not to destroy them." Even the agents looked impressed. And then quietly, something happened. The people of Millbrook started showing up, not just to watch, but to speak. One by one, small business owners came forward with their own stories: extortion, fear, bribes, retaliation. For years, they'd stayed quiet. But now they saw what standing up looked like, and it looked like an old man in work boots and a younger man in plain clothes who didn't flinch under pressure. On the third day, the judge called a recess. Outside, reporters gathered around Harold. "Did you expect this?" one asked. "That this would spark a town-wide uprising?" Harold looked at her, tired but clear-eyed. "I expected the truth to do what it always does," he said. "Show up when people stop being afraid." Damen stepped beside his father. "We didn't come to destroy a town," he said. "We came to remind it what it used to be." That night, after the court doors closed and the news vans drove off, Harold sat on a bench outside the shop. A cool breeze moved down the street, the kind that carries dust and memory. Damen stood next to him. "You did good, Dad," he said. Harold looked straight ahead. "No, we did good. I might have raised you, but you reminded me what I taught you." Damen nodded, then tilted his head slightly. "You think it's over?" "No," Harold said, but the tide turned. He lifted his coffee cup in the air, toward nothing, toward the town, toward the men still hiding behind power. And with a small, dry laugh, he said, "Now let's see how many more ghosts they want to meet." The verdict came down on a Wednesday. It was raining outside, light and steady. The kind of rain that made the streets feel quiet, like the town itself was holding its breath. Inside the courthouse, no one moved as the jury filed in. Not the judge, not the reporters, not the dozens of citizens who now filled the wooden benches, some still in work uniforms, some holding each other's hands, and not Harold Carter, who sat straight-backed in the front row, a small American flag, pin on his jacket, his bronze star visible to anyone paying attention. The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendants." He looked down, swallowed. "Guilty on all counts." There was no applause, no cheers. Just silence. But it wasn't a sad silence. It was the kind that fills a space after a long storm. The kind of silence that feels like peace. The mayor got 10 years. The police chief got 15. Officer Blake, after turning over more names and evidence than anyone expected, got 5, and would serve it under strict watch in a state where no one knew his name. Other names followed: businessmen, judges, officials. The rot had gone deep, but now it was exposed. And when sunlight hits something that's been hidden for too long, it dries up and blows away. The next morning, Millbrook felt different, cleaner. You could feel it in the way people walked, heads higher, doors open, kids playing outside again. without parents yelling to keep close. At Carter's Auto Repair, the garage bell chimed constantly, not because of car problems, but because people were dropping off thank you notes, pies, fresh paint, new tools. A man Harold had fixed a truck for in '93 brought in his grandson just to shake his hand, and in the middle of it all, Harold just kept working. Same bench, same old wrench, because that's how real men live, with quiet hands and loud integrity. Damen stood across the street, watching from the sidewalk, arms folded. He didn't smile much, but that day, he did. A little. Not because the battle was over, but because, for once, he could see something healing. The FBI had offered him a full-time liaison role. Washington wanted to give him a medal. Reporters kept calling for interviews. He said no to all of it, because none of that mattered, not to him. What mattered was this town, his father, and what came next. Later that week, Ryan Parker was officially sworn in as Millbrook's new chief of police. The ceremony was small, but everyone who mattered showed up, including Harold, who wore a clean collared shirt and stood right behind him, hand on his shoulder. After the oath, Ryan turned to the crowd. "I don't know how to fix everything," he said, "but I do know how to tell the truth. And I promise this, you won't have to be afraid of this badge ever again." That promise echoed louder than any applause. That evening, Harold and Damen sat on the back porch of the old house. Same, one Harold bought with his VA loan 40 years ago. The porch light flickered a bit, but the air was cool, and the neighborhood was finally quiet. "You ever think," Harold asked, "about staying? Starting fresh here?" Damen looked out at the street. A kid was riding a bike. A woman was planting flowers. "I thought about it," he said. "But there's another town like this one, a few counties over. Same fear, same silence, same kind of bullies." "I got a call yesterday from a guy trying to hold on to his family grocery store. Sounded tired." Harold nodded slowly. "You going?" "Tomorrow morning." They sat in silence a while. Then Harold spoke again, softly. "You know, I never asked you to fight my battles." "You didn't have to," Damen said. "You raised me right. That was enough." Harold chuckled. "I tried. Lord knows I messed up more than once." Damen leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You taught me how to use a wrench, how to stand my ground, how to never trade dignity for comfort. That's more than most people ever get." Harold looked over at his son, voice steady. "Don't forget to rest sometimes, son. Even ghosts need sleep." "I'll try," Damen said with a tired smile. But they both knew he wouldn't. Not yet. The next morning, Damen packed light. No weapons, just files, maps, a notebook filled with handwritten names. And in his jacket pocket, a small playing card. An ace of spades, just in case. Harold stood at the door as the truck started up. "Call me when you get there." "I will." "And if they've got bad coffee?" Damen smiled. "Then I'll teach them how to brew it right." They shook hands, then pulled each other into a firm, quiet hug. Then, with nothing left to say, Damen Carter, the ghost, drove off down a clean road, past a clean town, toward a place that still needed a little justice. And somewhere, far from Millbrook, far from headlines and handcuffs, in another quiet corner of America where corruption still whispered behind closed doors, a man picked up a phone. He'd just received an envelope. Inside, 3 photos: a bribe, a beating, a bank transfer, and a handwritten message on the back. "Some ghosts fight for the dead. I fight for the living. I'm already watching. See. Because sometimes justice wears a robe. Sometimes it wears a badge. And sometimes it wears the name of a son who never forgot what his father taught him. Never kneel to a bully. Never trade truth for silence. And never, ever let a good man stand alone."